The shocking truth about your 401k that most people don't want to think about and refuse to believe is that it's not going to be enough to last you in retirement. According to the study done by Empower, the average 401k balance for Americans that are nearing retirement is just $573,000. Now, that might sound like a lot, but the cold hard truth is it's not. It's not going to be enough. Experts are suggesting today that you should have somewhere between $1.5 to $2 million saved just to live the same lifestyle that you're currently living now in retirement. Now, you might be asking, well, why the huge gap? Well, I believe because of 4 hidden dangers that are eroding your retirement savings. And honestly, the last one is the least talked about. But we're going to cover it today. Let's dive in. First, we're going to cover the most controversial topic, which is fees. Now, you might think that you're just saving and investing inside your 401k, but you probably have no idea how much the fees are actually costing you year after year. Most people are saving into mutual funds inside of their 401ks, and they just got the fees that are listed on the statements, which is typically 0.25% or less. But newsflash, if you want to know what the actual cost of your 401k is, you would have to dive into the prospectus of each individual mutual fund inside your 401k, add up all the hidden fees to figure that out. If you take a look at this article by Forbes called The Real Cost to Owning a Mutual Fund, they dive into a lot of the hidden fees that are buried inside the prospectus of mutual funds. Here we're highlighting just the top 3 that are the most expensive. First, here you will see the expense ratio, which is basically the operating cost of the fund, averaging about 0.9%, which includes administrative and management fees and marketing costs. Next, here you will see transaction costs, and this is made up of a few different costs all combined together. This can range anywhere from 1% to 2%, and it really does vary based on how often the fund managers are buying and selling inside of your mutual funds. Did you know you had to pay for that? And last up here, you'll see the cash drag cost at about 0.83%, which is the negative impact on the returns from the fund managers holding some of the assets in cash. So after adding all that up, you can see that the average cost of owning a mutual fund on the low end might be 3%, but on the high end, it could be much more than that. And over time, that fee has a chance to significantly eat into your retirement savings. Now let's take a look at some numbers so you can actually see in a dollar amount how significantly fees impact your ending retirement balance. Let's say somebody had a balance of $100,000 in an account and they had it there for 20 years. They weren't adding to it, but it was growing at a rate of 7% every single year. We're going to see what it would look like if the account had no fees, 0 fees every single year, compared to 1.5%, compared to 3%. If they're paying no fees, that $100,000 would be estimated to grow to over $386,000 20 years from now. But if they're paying just a 1.5% fee per year, that $100,000 is expected to only grow to $286,000 20 years from now, which is essentially meaning that person paid $100,000 in fees over 20 years, compared to if they were paying a whopping 3% per year, which is what Forbes estimates us actually paying. Their balance would only be about $210,000 after 20 years, which means they paid $176,000 in fees. Which one sounds better? So if you think you're on track for retirement, those fees could be dragging you down and you don't even realize it. Now we got to talk about something that is keeping everybody awake at night because it's all over the news every single day, and that is the stock market. We know the stock market is volatile. According to Google AI, the stock market has had a correction every 1.2 years on average since 1980. A correction is defined as a decline of 10% or more from the previous closing high. Now, 5% per year decline or more has occurred on average every year since 1980. A 10% decline or more has occurred on average every 1.2 years since 1980. A 15% decline has occurred on average about once every 5 years. And a 20% decline has occurred on average once every 6 years. Now, here's the thing. While the stock market does generally go up over time, it does not go up every single year. And if you are relying solely on your 401k, well, that basically means you're betting your entire retirement on the next bull market when you could just as easily retire in the next bear market. Just take a look at the tech crisis of 2000, the Great Recession of 2008, and all the market volatility that we've experienced since the pandemic in 2020. And the craziest thing is we have no control over any of these events and when they are going to happen. So just because you are diligently saving and investing for retirement, that doesn't mean that the next market crash couldn't completely wipe out years of your retirement portfolio. And newsflash, friends, when you lose money, you actually lose time because you have the time to wait to access your money until all of those losses are recouped. Most investors often forget to also consider the difference between average and actual rates of return. Your average rate of return is calculated by simply just adding up all of the investment rates of return over a certain period of time and dividing them by the number of years. That's going to give you your average rate of return that you've earned in that portfolio, compared to the actual rate of return, which is going to tell you the actual realized gain that you received on that money. Here we're going to take a look at a real example measuring the S&P 500 from the year 2000 to 2024 to see if you were actually invested in the S&P, your statement, your average rate of return is going to say that you've earned 7.33%. And again, that is calculated by looking at the average rate of return that you've earned every single year divided by the number of years. But the actual rate of return that you would have gotten was just 5.7%, which is the actual realized gain on your money. Meaning if you started with $100,000 in 2000, today or in 2024, you would expect to have a balance of about $400,000, which is an actual return of 5.7%, not 7.33%. Next, we've got to talk taxes. If you're saving into a traditional 401k, that means you're not paying taxes today, you're deferring taxes until retirement. You will pay taxes on that money when you draw it out in retirement. If you're saving in a Roth 401k, that means you are paying taxes today, and that allows that money to grow and compound tax-free. So when you retire and take money out, you don't owe any taxes on that time. Now I get asked all the time, well, which one's right for me? And that's really going to be dependent on your current tax bracket and your stance on what you think is going to happen to taxes in the future. More on this in the video that I have linked in the description below. But the most common thing I hear from young people today is that their parents are advising them to save into traditional 401ks so they can defer paying taxes until retirement when they should be retiring in a lower tax bracket, ultimately meaning that they will pay less in taxes over time. Now, while this advice did work for the baby boomer generation because taxes were significantly higher when they started working, they've gone down significantly over the last 40 years. This may not be true for the working generation that is coming up behind them. If you take a look at this chart from the taxpolicycenter.org, you will realize that in the 1970s, when the baby boomer generation started working, the highest tax bracket was actually at 70%, and they have gone down significantly since then. But what's going to happen with the generation that is coming behind them? With our U.S. national debt skyrocketing and our underfunded liabilities of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and state pensions, highly unlikely taxes will go down in the future. They'll probably go up for the working generation today. Now, you might be thinking, well, okay, who cares if taxes go up? I just won't touch the money in my 401k. Well, unfortunately, the government is going to make you touch it. By the time you turn age 73, they impose what's called the RMD rule, the required minimum distribution rule, meaning you have to start taking out money every single year out of all of your tax-deferred retirement accounts, and that usually does start around 4% per year, and that does increase on you as you get older. For example, I'm working with a client right now that is 73 years old that now has to start taking RMDs out of her retirement portfolio, and she's got over $2.5 million in tax-deferred retirement accounts, and she only needs $1,000 a month to live. She doesn't need the RMD. The RMD is going to be significantly higher than that, and it's going to push her into a higher tax bracket, but she doesn't need the money. She'd rather leave it to her grandkids as an inheritance. But unfortunately, if she doesn't take the RMD, she's going to get significantly taxed and penalized on that money, so she has to take it out, regardless if she needs it or not. And finally, we need to discuss the fourth hidden danger that is most likely to sneak up on you in retirement because nobody's talking about it. And that would be inflation. And inflation is the rate that prices are rising. If you take a look at this chart from our friends at Investopedia.com, over the past 20 years, the average rate of inflation has been about 2.6% per year. This is the minimum interest rate that you need to be earning on your money every single year just to have the same buying or purchasing power as you did the year prior. Now let's see how inflation can actually erode your retirement savings. If you go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics website, you will see that they have a CPI inflation calculator that you can play around with. Let's pretend that you are 30 years old, set to retire 30 years from now, with an estimated $1 million in your 401k. If you work this calculator backwards, you can see that $1 million 30 years from now is estimated to only be worth $486,000 today. Do you think you could retire comfortably living off just $486,000 today? Probably not. So if we take all of that into consideration, factoring in the fees, the stock market volatility, the taxes, and the inflation, what could you expect to receive in income in retirement from your 401k? Let's take a look at some actual numbers and see how this plays out. If we take a look at an average 30-year-old male that's saving into his 401k, max funding it every single year, $23,500 per year, which realistically, guys, is only about 15% of Americans today. And let's say he does this for the next 30 years and plans to retire at age 60. If he's earning an average 7% rate of return across all years, his working years and his retirement years, we're just going with an average 7% rate of return. I realize it could be higher, it could also be lower. We're also going to factor out just 1.5% per year in fees. As you saw earlier, he's probably paying closer to 3% in fees, but I know some of you are going to argue me on that, so we're going to stick with 1.5%. He could expect to have an ending balance of $1.795 million inside his 401k by retirement, which would give him an estimated pre-tax annual income of about $117,000 every single year for 30 years. But now we have to subtract out taxes, and I'm just going to stick with 25%. Honestly, it's probably going to be higher, so you could do the math and factor it in higher, but if we say just 25%, you're factoring about $29,000 every single year just going to taxes, which should net him about $87,000 after taxes every single year in retirement, which may not sound all that bad today, but we have to factor out inflation. Subtracting inflation, that $87,000 is only going to be worth $42,000 every single year in retirement 30 years from now. But wait, you're saving into a Roth 401k. No worries, I did the calculations for you too. Let's say you're doing that same $23,500 every single year. You're going to end up with the same estimated balance as the pre-tax 401k of about $1.795 million in retirement, which should give you an estimated $117,000 every single year in income for 30 years. Now, the difference is we don't have to subtract out taxes, so you actually get to keep that $117,000 every single year. But we do need to subtract out inflation, which is going to make that $117,000 only worth $56,000 today. Can you afford to live on that? This is the reality that millions of Americans are facing. If you want to know more about what to do with your finances, check out the 2 videos that I have linked here. Subscribe so you can continue to educate yourself today so you can elevate your finances tomorrow.